Prof. Mbe, you can begin.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody listening and viewing public. I'd like to, first of all, thank you for attending this virtual town hall meeting. It's on a very important topic of the Engineering Profession Act. As you know, engineering is a profession that has to be properly guarded, properly respected. Engineers create wealth, engineers create infrastructure, etc. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon's program, starting now. This is Dr. Chris Maraj. Dr. Chris Maraj is a former assistant professor, at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He's currently a senior lecturer, which is the equivalent in the American terminology of an associate professor at the University of the West Indies. Dr. Maraj is a highly acclaimed academic, first-class honors, master's degree, both from UWI, a PhD from the prestigious Imperial College in London. I hand you now over to Dr. Maraj, who, as I said, is a moderator for this evening's or this afternoon's and evening's program. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Mbe. Welcome all. I would like to introduce our two presenters. The first is Professor Emeritus Winston A. Mellows of the UWI, who is a chemical engineer and chair of BOET. The second is Professor Emeritus Clement Mbe of the UWI, who is a metallurgist and chair of the Board of Governors of UTT. On our agenda is a brief presentation of the current status of the Act and the benefits of registration, followed by the draft amendments that will finally lead up to a Q&A session. Your questions can be entertained via the comment section in this session or through email to info@boet.org by the 7th of May. I will show that email address. I will type that email address in the chat. I now welcome Professor Mellows.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, fellow presenters, members of the media, and other interested persons. My name, as you've heard, is Professor Emeritus Winston Mellows, who currently holds the position of Chairman of BOET. I am pleased to give introductory remarks and present to you an overview of the current Act and the operations of BOET. This is being said in the context of our meeting to look at the proposed amendments to the Act under which BOET currently operates. So after many years of lobbying, presentations, negotiations, and compromises that featured the Association of Professional Engineers of Trinidad and Tobago, as well as engineering stakeholding organizations, individual members of the engineering fraternity, the Ministry of Works and Transport, and the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, the Engineering Profession Act 34 of 1985 was assented to by the fourth schedule, second Parliament of December on the 12th, 1985, and the board was inaugurated on October the 14th, 1986. Rationale for the Board of BOET. The Board of Engineering is today in Trinidad and Tobago is essentially a licensing authority of engineers for engineers to be accepted and generally recognized professional standards. The board regulates the practice of engineering by legislative code of ethics that is included as a schedule to the Engineering Profession Act, number 34 of 1985. What then is the structure of the board? The board has 4 registered engineers who are nominated by and holding membership in the Association of Professional Engineers of Trinidad and Tobago. Consists also of a public officer who's a registered engineer or who's eligible to be registered engineer. This person is usually one of the chief technical officer or somebody from the Ministry of Works. Also, 2 persons are appointed to represent the public interest, and the chairman is appointed from among its members, usually at the first meeting of the board. This board is appointed by the Minister of Works. That's basically what it has. And in the act, our functions are listed. We are supposed to assess the qualifications and experience of persons applying for registration. We are to conduct examinations of persons applying for registration as registered engineers. The board is required to register engineers and issue certificates of registration. The board also monitors the board is required to publish for and in the Gazette a list of qualifications and institutions recognized by this act. The board also is supposed to advise the minister on such amendments to the act as it considers desirable, and this is a part of this afternoon function that we have spoken to the minister already on what we have to do, and he advised us to have this public forum. That's why we have it today, because advising him on what amendments that we consider desirable. Generally, the board is supposed to regulate the practice of engineering in accordance with the Code of Ethics, published as the Schedule, Section 10 of the Act, 1934 of 1985. The board is supposed to maintain the register of registered engineers and to keep the register open to public scrutiny for such fees as may be prescribed. And there is a register of registered engineers kept in the Board Office, which anyone can see and scrutinize. They also publish on the website the names of engineers who are registered with the board and what category they are registered in. As a matter of fact, there are certain categories that we have registered. These categories are aeronautical engineering, agricultural engineering, architectural engineering, chemical engineering, civil, communication, electrical, electronic, environmental, hydraulic, industrial, marine, metallurgical, mining, petroleum, petroleum management, project management, sanitary and structural engineering. We also register specialists in building services, drainage, geotechnical, roads, asphalt, and transportation. I'm saying this because we can also register different categories depending on what we have present in the country, and therefore we have to keep abreast of what the engineering disciplines that are available as far as the country is concerned and training in engineering. The function of the registrar, as I said then, is to maintain this register, endorse in the register such particulars as required, and also, I say last but not least, to collect fees on behalf of the board. This register publishes at least once in every year in the Gazette the register and a list of those persons whose certificates of registration have been suspended or cancelled and perform such other functions as the board may prescribe. In addition, there is an office manager and also secretary who's employed to manage the day-to-day business of the board. The board shall appoint an accreditation committee of registered engineers of no less than 8 years engineering experience, the chairman being a member of the board. This committee shall assess and keep under review the academic qualifications for registration, and we follow the Engineering Council and also the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, which is also a US body. The Accreditation Committee also scrutinized, examined, and investigate the academic qualifications of individual applicants for registration. The Accreditation Committee of the Board assists in the preparation and the conduct of such examinations as the Board considers necessary. The Accreditation Committee also assists in the preparation of a list of qualifications and institutions required to be published so that the public can examine this. According to the Engineering Registration Act number 34 of 1985, the applicant must have been awarded a degree, a diploma, or other qualifications in engineering granted by a university or school of engineering that, in the opinion of the board, is satisfactory evidence of training in engineering and has had not less than 4 years experience in the practice of engineering and has acquired such standard proficiency as may be approved by the board. It doesn't mean doing the same thing over and over every year, but actually having a good experience as far as engineering is concerned. A registered engineer is taken to mean a person who, by reason of special knowledge of the mathematical and the physical sciences and the principles and methods of engineering research, analysis, design, construction, and maintenance management, customarily acquired by a prolonged course of specialized intellectual instruction, study, and practical experience, is qualified to engage in the practice of engineering at the engineering level as attested by a certificate of registration as an engineer under this act. In order to attain the education requirements, an applicant must have an accredited bachelor's degree in a recognized field of engineering. And for persons who graduated after 2010, further learning to the level of a master's degree would be required and is required. You may ask the question then, why more than a bachelor's degree after 2010? So the question may be asked, as I said just now, why 2010? Around 2008, the degree accreditation body, that is the Engineering Council, stipulated that from 2010, the 3-year engineering degrees awarded by the University of the West Indies would only be designated as being on the way to chartered engineering status, and that was a very important statement. We are accredited on the way to chartered engineering status. And therefore, in this context, academic qualifications up to the benchmark level can be acquired by a master's degree in an acceptable field or a combination of academic courses, short courses, and work-based courses that accumulatively can be considered equivalent to a master's degree in terms of level and content and extent. Some comments on the Master of Science. In order to be internationally recognized, the board follows the guidelines of UK Engineering Council. The Master of Science degree, MSc, in Professional Engineering from UK Engineering Council's program is tailored to individuals and integrates learning in the workplace alongside supervised work-based professional development. The UWE has MSc courses in each discipline, and the local University of Trinidad and Tobago has relevant master's degree and a 4-year MS program which satisfies the education requirement for registration. Typically, a taught master's degree is between 42 to 48 credits, where a credit is defined as a weekly 1-hour lecture in a 15-week term, 13 of which are used for teaching, the other 2 for examinations. This would consist typically of 10 to 12 3-credit courses, plus a dissertation of 6 to 12 credits. In order for a combination further learning package to attain the educational benchmark level for professional registration, the different types of educational activities must be accorded scores which accumulatively must be equivalent to the credits of a master's degree of at least 42 credits, I should say. We also look after continuing professional development, even though at the present moment it is not compulsory to be registered. We look at audited university courses. There is a committee set up, of course, between APEC and the Board of Engineering to perform this duty. So audited university courses, that is attendance without examination, count the credits, short courses based or otherwise, are accorded PDUs as officially designated by a professional body such as ICE, IMechE, IET, IChemE, ASCE, ASME, IEE, GOET, etc. PDUs or CPDs, as they're also called, are granted locally in accordance with this joint APEC with CPD committee that I referred to earlier. We're looking at also, I said, there's no mandatory PDUs. So PDUs are now being considered as a requirement for continued registration in the proposed act. Graduates are advised to regularly consult with BOET to have their further learning activities approved by BOET. So requirements for registration: a person is qualified to be registered as a registered engineer if he or she has been awarded a degree, diploma, or other qualifications in engineering granted by university, school of engineering, or other institutions that, in the opinion of the board, is evidence of a satisfactory training in engineering, and that he or she has had not less than 4 years experience in the practice of engineering and has attained such standards of proficiency as approved by the board. A registered engineer, therefore, is qualified as a registered engineer. So a person is qualified to be registered as a registered engineer if he or she has been awarded a degree or diploma or other qualifications in engineering granted by university or school of engineering that, in the opinion of the board, is evidence of satisfactory training in engineering, that he or she has had not less than 4 years experience in the practice of engineering, has attained such a standard of proficiency as may be approved by the board. The board has an assessment committee whose functions are to review engineering work done, professional experience by applicants seeking to qualify for registration, and to make recommendations to the board. I mentioned, this is just a few of the categories that I mentioned early on. So I just put it there to remind you some of the categories that we mentioned early on. We also welcome PR committee that also keeps in touch with stakeholders. Oftentimes, the board itself are asked questions as far as what industry requires, and the registrar will respond to them and let them know what is expected being a registered engineer is concerned. So that is how we normally receive feedback from industry as well as even the ministry. Whoever asks questions as far as what's required, we then can apply, and also the website with that information who we look at. We also acknowledge, therefore, the political and economic changes in the regional and international environment that are bound to impact on what now and beyond. And that is another main reason why we are having amendments to the act, because engineering has changed considerably since 1985. That's over 37, around 37 years ago. And therefore, we have to bring ourselves up to date, and therefore we must amend the act and also bring before the minister what required, and we feel then that we've reached the stage where, like other professions, it should be mandatory to register as a professional engineer. And as I said, we've identified a number of stakeholders who are present this afternoon, I believe, whom we believe can give us feedback on the amendments we have identified. I'd like, therefore, to thank you, and I will hand you back over to the moderator, who will consider any questions that may have been asked. So I will stop here at this present moment.
Thank you, Professor Emeritus Malus. We will come to the question and answer session in a little bit. I would now like for Prof. Emeritus Imbe to give his contribution. Prof. Imbe. You'll need to unmute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I tend to mute when I'm not speaking so that it clears up the voice, the airways. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Dr. Maraj. I don't think I need to add very much to what Professor Mellows has just said, except that I need to emphasize that probably the major amendment we'd like to make to the Act is the question of mandatory registration of engineers. That is for people who call themselves engineers. Now, in many jurisdictions, many countries, in order to practice as an engineer, you have to register, just as an attorney has to do or a medical doctor has to do. There are other jurisdictions where you do not have to register as what is called a professional engineer, or in Britain, a chartered engineer. However, these countries, both their social norms and accompanying legislation makes it almost mandatory that if you are going to call yourself an engineer and practice what is in fact called engineering, that you are bound by other restrictions which we don't have in certain countries, here for instance. So, for example, you don't have to be a chartered engineer to practice engineering in the United Kingdom. However, if you are not a chartered engineer, employers question why. It becomes very difficult for either your clients as an engineer, whether in an engineering firm or as a consultant, or you yourself, it becomes very difficult to answer the question why you're not a chartered engineer. So the society itself has made it such that people almost always become chartered engineers, particularly if they want to work as consultants, if they want to stamp plans, if they want to stamp project documents, etc. As I say, in many countries it's mandatory. We believe that it should be mandatory in Trinidad and Tobago because we have not really matured as many other societies in the profession of engineering as in other professions. The two main professions, the medical profession and the legal profession, where you cannot practice at a certain level, at the professional level. You cannot practice as an attorney, you cannot practice as a medical doctor, unless you are registered with the respective national organization, the regulatory body. So it's important that we have people who are operating at the professional level, that they are registered just as the medical doctor, the attorney has to register. For example, the engineering profession was the leader in what is now called accreditation, which is widely accepted and widely expected by the society at large. Again, accreditation is a voluntary exercise. As an institution, as a university, you don't have to go for what is called institutional accreditation. But if you don't, the question, the very large question is why? Prospective clients, people who apply for jobs as engineers or otherwise from an unaccredited institution are very likely to be frowned upon. They're not acceptable, their qualifications are not acceptable. So there's institutional accreditation. That is the institution itself, the university or other tertiary institution goes for what is called institutional accreditation. However, there are two professions which make it almost mandatory. It is effectively mandatory that these two professions are accredited program by program. What do I mean by program by program? If a university, any tertiary institution, whether it's called a university, there are many tertiary institutions that are not called. The great MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It is not called a university, but it's the #1 university in the world. So any tertiary institution that has programs in engineering or medicine, and let's take engineering. So a university has a program in civil engineering, for example. That program, if it is not accredited by an internationally recognized body, the degree is diminished in its recognition by governments, by prospective clients, by employers. So the University of West Indies, for example, because we evolved from the University of London, there are several institutions that evolved from the University of London. We were for 14 years, from 1948 to 1962, we were called a University College of the West Indies. In other words, we are an external college of the University of London. As I said, there are several. Imperial College was at one time part of the University of London, but they became so big and so well recognized that they are on their own now. Similarly, the University of the West Indies became such that in 1962, the University of the West Indies got its Royal Charter. 1962, before any of the English-speaking Caribbean countries got independence. Jamaica got independence 1st of August, 1962, Trinidad and Tobago, 31st of August, 1962, and other countries followed years after, Barbados and Guyana and so on. So while we were still colonies, the British found it prudent to grant the university its own charter, just as the University of Cambridge, University of London, the University of Oxford, etc. You don't get a royal charter just like that. But when accreditation became more required by clients and governments and so on, University of West Indies decided that we would go for accreditation. Before accreditation, we had, and we still do, had very robust quality control measures in place. All our examinations went to external examiners in different parts of the world. All our questions, our papers, everything. But we started going for accreditation in the 80s because it was becoming almost mandatory. It wasn't before, but it was almost mandatory. So we decided to go with the Engineering Council, which is an umbrella body for all the engineering and associate disciplines, about 44 of them. So that our degree in mechanical engineering, for instance, is accredited through the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, which is headquartered in London, but it's an international institution, and so on. Similarly, the medical degrees are accredited. They were accredited at one time by the Medical Council of Great Britain. Great Britain told the Caribbean, listen, we believe you should have your own CARICOM council, will guide you. So with the guidance of the Medical Council of Great Britain, the Caribbean formed its own accreditation for medical sciences degrees. So all our medical sciences programs, whether it is general human medicine, if I may call it that, or veterinary medicine, or dentistry or so, are accredited by that internationally recognized CARICOM accreditation body. The engineers still use the British institutions. They are part, the British institutions, through the Engineering Council, they are part of what is called the Washington Accord, which is a national body, you know, with the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Germany has joined, India. A number of countries have joined later after it was first formed in 1999. So we are accredited by an internationally recognized body, the Engineering Council, through it. So I think it is important for us to understand that accreditation, and it is important for us to understand why we have gone the way of asking for a master's degree on top of the bachelor's degree, or further learning to the equivalent of a master's degree, and that is not very difficult to find the equivalence, because the British institutions which we use for accreditation, that is their standard now. Their standard is either after A-levels, which is to do in Britain, or CAPE as we do here, 4 years, which is a 4-year continuous degree called an MEng degree. So it's like the 3-year bachelor's degree with a top-up year, or you can do a conventional 3-year degree after your A-levels or in our case CAPE, and do a master's degree or further learning to that level. And that is why we have, so in Professor Mello's presentation, you would see the question, why? Why do we ask for, the bar has been raised in several areas, in several professions, etc. And one of the things we'd like to do, but this has to have discussion among our peers and also the other professionals and the industry representatives, is should we in fact mandate continuous professional or continuing professional development in order to maintain your registration status. I will stop there as I say, as a continuation of or complement what Professor Mello said. He had gone through what the Board of Engineering is all about, and I've given some further information. So I think I'll stop there and hand over back to you, moderator, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Professor Mbe. We already have some questions, some comments coming in, and what I will try to do is attempt to answer some of them as we get into the proposed amendments to the Act. I'm going to share a document now detailing those proposed amendments that are in blue. So here we have the proposed amendments, and as I stated, they're documented in blue. And Professor Mbe will lead this part. And Professor Mbe, if it's okay, I could stop you while you're talking to answer some of the queries. If both you and Professor Mellows can answer the queries. If you don't mind that I stop you.
No, not at all.
Okay.
We want this to be as interactive as possible. So if I'm either going off track or if the questionnaire, the person who's asking the question wants to interject in whatever way, no problem.
Okay, so
We want this to be a free and open session.
no problem. So we will begin by looking at the sections, that are in blue, because we are not here to delve into what exists already. We are here to delve into what are the proposed amendments. So on to you, Professor Imbe. I will scroll and stop you sometimes as the questions are related accordingly.
Yes, well, as you my eyes are not as good as when I was your age, Chris, but I'll look at this stuff as we go along. I mean, I am familiar with it, of course. So a lot of what you see here is really cleaning up and modernizing the language. Most of it exists already in the Act. So for instance, the Act means the Engineering Profession Act as cited above. By above, what we mean is we'd like this act this amended act to come into being in 2022. We can't put a number yet. The Parliament will have to do that. When we say the Association of Professional Engineers, we don't have to spell it out all the time. We mean the Association of Professional Engineers of Trinidad and Tobago. By the way, that was incorporated in 1961, a long time ago, by a number of senior engineers, most of whom have passed on, and we acknowledge them in various ways. The board means the board, like the board of any organization, a company, or a state enterprise, or what. As you saw, Professor Mello said, the board comprises 4 and 1 and 2, so 7 people. Certificate means a certificate granted under Section 26. Now, the word certificate is used in UE and UDT. It has a very special meaning. We use the word certificate normally to refer to a 1-year university course. We use the word diploma in UDT to mean a 2-year university course. So that's like an associate degree. And then we go to the word bachelor's degree or whatever. But certificate is really a very generic term. So once you could have a certificate which says you have a PhD, it's a PhD certificate. So therefore that's why we had to specify that the word certificate in this context means something generic under 2026, a certificate in engineering, which really is the equivalent of a bachelor's or a MN. Engineer, and that's very important. Engineer means a person who, through specialized education, training, and experience, is skilled in the principles and practice of engineering. What that effectively means is that you're not supposed to call yourself an engineer unless you have gone through specialized education, training, and experience to a particular level. There are people who are craftsmen. There are people who are technicians. There are people who are technologists. And there are people who are engineers, or as in some jurisdiction, professional engineers. We used to use the term professional engineer. It's still used by the Association of Professional Engineers in a particular way, but once the board came into existence, we decided to use the word registered engineer. It is called professional engineer, PE or PEng. In North America, it's called chartered engineer. In the United Kingdom, it's just called ING, engineer, in Europe. And let me explain, I should have done that before. When you have that designation before your name in Europe, for instance, a medical doctor in Trinidad and Tobago, we always put Dr. So-and-so, or PhD Dr. So-and-so. When you're an engineer in Europe, you use the designation, and everybody uses the action ING. That designation is as prestigious as DR for a medical doctor. Not as prestigious as DR for PhD, but for a medical doctor. So we understand that that word engineer. Now, engineering again means not the practice of crafts, not the practice of technician work, but the practice of at a higher level of professional engineering. Minister, of course, the Minister of Works and Transport, whatever name that is the Minister of Works and whatever, that is the person who is normally the line minister for the Board of Engineering. You know what the register means? The register means just a list of engineers who are registered. A registered engineer, Professor Mellows went through that. And again, we have to, a registered engineer is really somebody who is deserving and is qualified to practice engineering. So those are the, I will stop there if there are any questions for now.
Yes, we do have some questions. The first is a holistic one coming from someone who calls himself or herself as Mama Gail. What problems will be solved by amending the act? I responded to that person and said it is a extra, the amendments are an extra means of protecting the public. But if you all want to elaborate on it further, please do.
Professor Mellows, or you want me to?
You start, Colin, right
Yeah.
away.
If anyone goes to the website and looks at the constitution of any engineering body, one would see that the first responsibility of any engineering society, any regulatory board, is the protection of the society. In other words, you want people to practice engineering who are skilled and trained to a particular level. It doesn't mean that we don't need craftsmen, we don't need technicians, definitely. But you want to make sure that what is described as an engineering project has some oversight from a professional engineer. It is for the protection of the public, and that is the number one goal, the number one aim of any professional society or any regulatory board. And that can be checked by anybody. I don't think I need to go further than that. And what we have to make sure is that engineering as is described is practiced by professional engineers.
And the engineers themselves carry certain responsibilities as far as engineering works are concerned. You often read in the newspaper that what is the engineering society saying? What is WEC saying on particular instances, things that happen in the country? And we can only answer for those persons who are actually registered under the act. All other persons calling themselves engineers, we can't really, they don't have our stamp. And the persons having the registered engineering stamp are the ones who are responsible for us for the way in which they operate, because we have a code of ethics. I think that should help answer what is being asked in that respect. I also noticed some person asking something about how long it takes to do registration. It takes for the most 2 to 3 months. The accreditation committee meets every single month, and then it goes on to the assessment committee who would examine the qualifications, etc. And there's an engineer, there's a committee which looks at what they do. Sometimes they're not up to marks. You have to ask questions back and forth, and we have exams, etc. So that sometimes causes a delay. And of course, at the start of this year, we did have a problem because early on we didn't have our full complement of engineers. We now have that, and also registered, and the registrar also passed away. So there may be a little delay at the start of this year, but things are back to normal now. We have a full board, I may say that.
Thanks, Professor Mellows and Professor Imbe. As a follow-up question to what you just responded to, Professor Mellows, the person also wanted to know if there will be any change to that registration process and time with these amendments.
Yes, of course, we streamline everything now, because we're not only looking at what they do, but how they perform as a resident engineer. So that's why we're moving forward to the mandatory part as well, because we're now looking at what they do and how they keep their post of resident engineer. That comes into play with our CPDs, and we do have a committee, but nobody at this present moment pays any attention to it because the fact it is not compulsory. And therefore they must now do PPDs in order to keep their registration, even as lawyers and doctors do. They must stand with the best practice that is possible at the present moment. So that's one thing that should change. Responsibility for not doing the same thing over and over and over without improving yourself as the years go along.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Mellows. Jean-Luc Alexis is asking, why are we not including the same ING before our names? I guess he's asking why are we going the way of saying orange after our names for those who are registered.
Okay, there are two ways that this happens. In North America, you put your name and you put PE or PNG, depending on where. Most places in the United States is PE, and some places in Canada, PNG. And it goes after your name. Similarly, CNG, that is capital C, capital E, common NG, which is the British designation, which effectively as PNG, goes after your name. In Europe, as I say, they have it, it's a prenominal, as it's called. It's before your name. Just as doctor is before your name, and so on. So it's just a question of following the traditional countries that we normally think, that is North America and Britain, English-speaking countries, if you like. Similarly in Australia and the other English-speaking countries. It's a European thing to have the ING before your name. And of course, there's URING, EURING, which, because when Europe, well, not became one, but when they had the European Union, that political association, you can also become a URING. You have to be, of course, a little special. Be a URING. In other words, you can practice any part of it. We have had people in Trinidad and Tobago who had the designation URING, because they were distinguished enough and applied and had the designation URING. So it's just a question of choice. But I do know that we have a practice in Trinidad too, that we put ENG before our name. So Engineer Mellows, Engineer Maraj, Engineer Mbea. We do that. It's sort of unofficial, but it's something that is often done, and we often refer to our colleagues in that way. Now, in Germany, they give you all your titles. So let us say you are a PhD, for example, and you are a ING. So, and let us say you are also a professor. You'll find in Germany that because you got the ING first, it's closest to your name, then the PhDs would be next. You'll find it would be Professor, Dr. Ing, so and so. I was very amused in Germany when I first went to Germany, and as a professor. I've been to Germany before I was a professor when I was doing my master's in England. But as a professor, and they refer to me as Professor Dr. Engineer. So they go overboard with it in Germany. I'm not sure what they do in France or other places. But that's what it is. It's a question of choice.
Thanks, Prof. Mbe. Another question from Twain Wallace. How soon can applicants who would have submitted last year expect a response on whether they have attained admission into BOET? Professor Mellows?
Could you repeat that question? I missed part of it.
Yeah, so Twain Wallace is asking for applicants who submitted last year and didn't get a response as yet. when would that response be received?
I don't know if you can answer individual questions on that this afternoon, but I already spoke on that not so very long ago when I said the reason why something would delay. The board was not properly constituted, we didn't have all the board members, and I also said that the registrar passed away, and therefore there was some delay, but we're back to normal now. I think I answered that already.
Okay. Ryan Collins has asked, the Engineering Profession Act is silent on the what specific competence is required for registration. The Engineering Council has the UK spec. What competence framework does BOET follow? Professor Imbe?
Okay, the UK spec is what is used by the accreditation, by the Engineering Council. The Engineering Council, as I say, use the individual institutions to do the accreditation. So, okay. So the degree in civil engineering, for example, in UWI, the degree in petroleum engineering in UDT or what have you. The Engineering Council would send the specific institution to Trinidad and Tobago after a process has been followed. So the institution has to say what they do. In other words, they have to send up a report called a self-study. And it goes back and forth and they get clarification and so on. And the institution will then pay a visit to the university, for instance, and say, all right, we have come to see if what you have in your self-study is really true. Effectively, that's what it is. So they come for 3 days and they check on everything. They check on even some students, they ask the students, what are their views of how the lecturers lecture and blah, blah, blah. They check, of course, on your labs. They check on your other facilities, make sure that you have proper rooms. Air-conditioned rooms is a hot country to do your lectures. They make sure you have all the backup support. Do you have a cafeteria on campus for these students? Things like that, Do you have proper pastoral care for the students? Do you have a psychologist on board and so on? So do you have proper administrative structures in place? So they check on both the administrative structure within the particular department and the general administrative structure, the overall university administration. So they come and check to make sure that everything that you have said, so you have to be, well, we can't lie. Everything that you have said in your self-study is correct. So in fact, we at the board don't have to specify all those things that the Engineering Council in the UK spec specify, because we specify one overarching requirement. You must have an accredited degree. So once you have an accredited degree, it means you have gone through that entire process at the university or college or whatever. The board doesn't have to repeat that. The board has an overarching, as I repeat, requirement, an accredited degree. An accredited degree, it means that your department that gave you that degree, or the department from where you studied and the university gave you that degree, has gone through all the requirements of the UK spec because you are accredited.
Chair, I may say that the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago also does that locally. They go through, they have to do exactly that to be registered in Trinidad and Tobago, UTT, UWI, all of these institutions have to go through the process you just described, including having site, that the ownership of the site, that the programs that they do are all these things UTT, ACTT does as well.
Thanks. Ryan Collins also asked, why isn't there an engineer and training category to monitor the development of graduates like the USA?
All right. The USA doesn't have any national engineer in training program. Let me give an example. For example, you study to be a medical doctor, UWI, for example, which is stringent. You study for a medical doctor in North America, you have to have a degree first, and you do it in 4 years. And then you do your residency and so. So, okay. So you go to UWI after 3.5 years, you get what is called a bachelor's degree in medical sciences. You don't get your MMBS or whatever yet. Then you have to spend another 18 months of what is called a rotation. That is really practical work in the hospitals and so on. It is easy to take a medical doctor and carry him to a hospital where they were supposed to see everything that people are afflicted with. So you spend 18 months in rotation. So 3.5 years, pure study, 18 months rotation. So after 5 years, you have done your studies. You then have to do 1 year of practice. That practice is supervised, not as stringently as the rotation, for example. So after 6 years, you are qualified as a medical doctor. You could go and hang up your shingles, as the English expression is, and set up an office. The legal profession says you must do a bachelor's degree in 3 years, after CAPE, of course, and then you go 2 years to law school, and law school gives you a practice. You have a certain amount of practice. And in this practice, you have moot court, in other words, a fake court, if you like, but there are different aspects of the practice and some more studies that you do in the law school. After 5 years, you can be called to the bar, and you can go and set up an office. You can go and defend the biggest person accused of murder in Toronto. In engineering, we say, no. Engineering is not that easy. You can't take an engineer and put him in one institution like a hospital and expect to give him all the experiences that an engineer is supposed to get. It's easy for medicine. You go to a hospital and that's it. It's relatively easy for the legal profession. What is there? There are the courts, so they have moot court, and then there are the question of conveyancing. So these people go through the whole question of conveyancing, making deeds and wills and agreements, although some things don't have to be, neither agreement nor will needs an attorney, but a deed does need an attorney, and other kinds of agreements that attorneys do. So it's easy. It is not easy. Engineering is the widest profession in the world. It is not easy to say, well, I will put you in where? BP, or I'll put you in the government service, military works. No, it's not so easy. So therefore, we require more time. We say the doctors 6 years, the attorneys 5 years. You have to have a minimum of 7 years. 3 years for your degree. If you do it in 3 years, most people don't. For your degree after your CAPE, and 4 years of relevant engineering practice. If some people do, you can't do your degree and go and sell doubles and come and say, listen, it's 4 years after my degree, we need to scrutinize your practice. And if your practice we find is not relevant, we say, well, you need a little more. So the engineering profession has decided that we'll use some extra time for people to get practice, because it's not as easy as medicine, and the institutions that practice engineering are not as confined as a hospital or a court or a legal firm doing certain things. Yeah?
Thanks, Prof. Mbe. Another question from Shivanand Maharaj. So he's saying, just as how you could equate orange with CNG, he's asking if there's any facilitation for the ING with equivalent with WET.
I don't know. I don't fully understand the question, but let me say this. Right now, we have recommended, that is one of the changes we are recommending, that anybody who is a registered engineer in a CARICOM country, where the criteria are similar, as the educational and experience criteria are similar, they would be eligible to be registered in Trinidad and Tobago. Some people have said, well, why CARICOM country? In other words, if somebody is a professional engineer, or so, if somebody is a chartered engineer in the United Kingdom, they are recognized by the same body that do your accreditation, the body that you have followed. Why can't you recognize that person? And that is something that we have taken on board. But some people have said, because we have sent this thing to several people for comment, and that is something that needs consideration, whether in fact we should say, well, listen, ING from Europe, CNG from thing, whatever, is equivalent to RNG. So if that person, if we are satisfied that that person can practice in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's something under consideration. And it's a good question. Professor Meadows wants to expand on that.
No, because I don't think I need to say anything, because if you go through some of the rest of the document this afternoon, it refers a lot of what we're discussing right now. In fact, if you look under the prohibitions, you see different things. So that's then if we go through that, we'll be able to clarify some of the things that they're asking at present. Okay. So I don't know, it depends on the moderator.
Yeah, I think it's about time. Thank you, Professor Mellows. I think it's
Noel,
about time. Yeah.
Let me ask, are there any other questions?
Yes, we have some more questions, but I will try to tailor it to suit the particular section that we are on. Okay. So I think that we can move based on what questions were asked. And this section here deals with the mandatory registration. Amin Bash, before you start, Prof. Imbe, Amin Bash had a comment about this section 3.1a, that it needs rewording. A recent graduate needs to have engineering experience before being able to register. So somewhere in this section 3.1a, he's talking about engineering experience. So I'll pass over to you to elaborate on this section, which gets into the mandatory registration part of the update.
That's the prohibition, right?
Yeah.
I'll ask Engineer Bash, and you'll notice I call him Engineer Bash because, as I say, it's common for us to do that. ENG Bash, Engineer Bash. I mean, we all know him very well in the association. He has served the association well in various capacities and so on. So I'll ask Engineer Bash to send me an email or to send it to the board or what have you, rather than get into that right now. So if he thinks that we should reword something, we take Engineer Bash's comment very seriously, and I'm sure it will be taken on board. Okay, so these are what I call prohibitions. No person who is not registered under the Act shall carry on the practice of engineering. Remember, engineering was described. It's not anything, it's not the nearby guy who's welding a gate to burger-proof the house. It's not the guy who's welding a muffler. So engineering was described. So to practice engineering, you should not practice engineering as described in this act unless you are a registered engineer. That's, maybe it should be very clear. Maybe we should have nobody should assume the title of engineer. So maybe it should be clearer, but at the moment, that is what that means. That you should not assume the title of engineer and practice engineering unless you're registered. Take or use the description registered engineer either along or in conjunction with other words or initials in such manner as to imply acceptability to carry on the practice of engineering. Now, maybe again it should be clearer. It should be that it should not take on the description of engineer, not even just registered engineer, should be. But the word either along or in conjunction with any other words. Okay. That just expands on the first point, a lot of these things are, in a sense, repetition, but we have to do it for the sake of emphasis. Use the word engineering in describing services provided in such a manner as to suggest registration under this act. Again, in many jurisdictions, the word engineering is protected. In other words, you can't use engineering willy-nilly. The word engineering, not just engineer as a title and as a person who is supposed to be registered, but engineering. So D, take or use any designation, title, name, initials, or description indicating or implying registration to carry on the practice of engineering. Again, a bit repetitive, but just for emphasis and for clarity. Advertise in such a manner as to suggest registration under this act. Sign or stamp any plans, drawings, designs, or specifications purporting to be acting in the capacity of such registered. Only registered engineers get legal stamps with their name and registration number, which they use to stamp plans or other documents as a registered engineer. Nobody should sign something as though it comes from a registered engineer, but cleverly, you know, composing a stamp or so that may give the impression that it is done by a registered. So that those prohibitions, as I said, a lot of them, some of them maybe should be much clearer in the sense that you should not assume the title even of engineer, as a registered engineer. But this is as it is at the moment. If we have suggestions or strengthen this or what have you.
So I will move on to the next section in blue. Which is the term of office.
I think I could probably handle this question. Maraj, a person appointed to the board holds office for a term of 3 years until his replacement has been appointed, but eligible for appointment for a maximum of 2 further consecutive terms. What has happened is here, there's a hiatus usually when the board finishes its term until the other board is elected, and the business of the board still has to go on in terms of registration. So we feel that there should be some continuity. At the present moment, the board would have to write to the minister asking permission to stay on until the new board has been appointed. So I think this covers that, what happens in practice, and to avoid that lapse between the two. We're not sure if fish or fowl, let's call it that. And there's this hiatus between one board. Sometimes it can last up to a year before a new board is appointed, even though the ministry has been informed, etc., etc. I think you're aware of that, I believe. I don't know if Professor Amber has anything to say on that.
No, it doesn't only happen to the Board of Engineering. Many public institutions have been without a board for a period. However, the work of the institution continues, and the work is carried out by the management. And if there's any very important, the CEO has the discretion of going to the minister through the PS if they think that there's a very important change or otherwise that they should do or action that they should take. In the case of the board, that is not so. The board doesn't have a very, what I would say, qualified management structure. The board cannot afford that. The board has a registrar. Find that registrar has to be a registered engineer. And the board has an office manager and an administrative assistant in that sense, administrative officer. So the board does not have that broad management structure so that they can operate. Remember, the board has 2 very important committees. the accreditation committee, which looks at academic qualifications, and the assessment committee, which looks at. So, and those committees report to the board. So if there is no official board, the board is stymied, and it answers partly a question that was answered before, that some people applied last year and weren't able to get the answer in quick time, in the 2 to 3 months that the board has promised. So this just says that, listen, if it is that the board's term, the 3-year term is up, and the minister hasn't appointed somebody to replace or to extend that person if they are extendable, the board still exists. It is very important for the Board of Engineering, which does not have, as I say, that supporting management structure all other boards have of other institutions, whether like UTT, for instance, on the board. We have a whole management structure, MIC, a whole management structure, WASA, a whole management structure, TNTech, a management structure of highly competent and trained people. We don't have that on the board. So we cannot afford to be in abeyance, in limbo. That is the extension that I like that.
Thanks, Prof. Prof. Mellos, just taking one step back to the prohibition section. Anthony Lam asked about new graduates carrying out engineering functions under the supervision of an RN. He's indicating that it should be perhaps clearer how new graduates will operate under this ambit.
I would say then that new graduates are really what we call engineers in training, and therefore they operate under the guidance. They can be employed to work in engineering service as such, but they operate under the guidance of a registered engineer, but they're still employable as engineers, not necessarily using the title, but considered to be really engineers in training. That's how it's looked at in those first 5 years after graduation. And of course, provision is usually made in the company or where they're working for them to be trained as such, not just, and therefore, you notice that when they apply for registration, it is with the advice of a person who knows what they have been doing, and this forms part of the application as an engineer, or be a registered engineer. They must show that they've been under supervision of somebody who's a registered engineer usually, and that's what we ask for, that they have been performing engineering activities during the time which they're spending between getting the qualification, basic qualification, and practice, as we call it. Okay, so there's provision for that as far as they're concerned, but they're not using the title registered engineer, but they're like engineers in training, and they must have some kind of training. In fact, I believe that usually the bodies such as APEC would have training courses, webinars, and I believe they do have this for engineers. It's always good. It's an ongoing process. I know that the local IChemE that has been started in Trinidad and Tobago, they actually run webinars to train engineers, etc., and this has been done on a regular basis. So they can't really say that they don't get any training, but I know that provision has been made for engineers now graduating to be catered for, both at work and also in the institutions that we have available. And they can also be trained by others who, when they apply for CPD, they can also use the training as well, young engineers. But I know courses do go on.
Thank you, Professor Mellos. So I'll move on to the next section in blue, 11.1.
Says the board, in consultation with associated professional engineers, may appoint such committees or persons as it may think fit, and may delegate such committees or persons the power and authority to carry out on behalf of such duties as the board may determine. So, however, such committees shall have the power to make rules. There are certain things that, like for instance, the CPD committee has been put up in conjunction with the Association of Professional Engineers, and it's run then by this committee. And that's also in consultation with the Board of Engineering, and this makes provision for that as well. Now, these committees don't have the power to make rules, but they're asked to operate on behalf of both the association and the Board of Engineering. These are committees that would straddle both organizations as such, and that's give us these ad hoc committees can be set up. And the other part of it says that's what we have. The Assessment Accreditation Committee, that is also catered for. But we're saying that members of these committees need not be members of the board, but such committee members shall be registered engineers as well as members of the Association of Professional Engineers. That basically refers then to the Section 1 and also Section 2, make use of engineers on the Accreditation Committee and also Assessment Committee who don't necessarily belong to the Board of Engineering or members of the Board of Engineering, but they assist the board in performance of its duties. And therefore, we're looking at other committees that may be set up to carry out a specific function between the Board of Engineering and the Association of Professional Engineers. But our standard committees are will be number 2 for the Board of Engineering.
Thanks, Professor Mellows. Amin Bash has made a comment on 11.1. He's asking, why does APET need to be stated here that BOET is independent of APET? Why involve APET in number 1?
May I point out that the board, in consultation with the Association of Professional Engineers, may appoint such committees, may appoint. So the board can appoint, the board has appointed, the board is empowered to appoint 2 committees on its own, and they can appoint any other committees. For instance, the law specifies that the board must appoint a accreditation committee and an assessment committee. Remember the Association of Professional Engineers has a majority 4 members of the 7 members on the board. So what the board is doing is paying recognition to the association and working together the association. So what it says is that they may appoint. It doesn't say shall appoint. And that is all it is that is paying homage, if you like. It's forbear the Association of Professional Engineers and showing that we work together with the association. The association is what is referred to as a learned society, just as the ASME or whatever else. It doesn't regulate. The board was established to regulate. In many societies, they are different. In some societies, they're the same. But in many societies, they are different. And again, because of the lack of maturity of the engineering profession insofar as mandatory registration and things like that are concerned, and the use of the term engineer and even engineering and so, we thought that it was a good idea to work together with the association. That's what we are meaning before. So it's may appoint, not shall appoint.
Follow-up question to the committees is towards Professor Mellows. Should these committees have as their chairs the a BOET committee person?
In the same way that you just said me, we may appoint these, and especially the last point, and the persons who are registered engineers, we appoint them to these ad hoc committees. But not the board committees, the accreditation and the assessment committees must be a board member to chair these 2 committees. But these other committees which they may appoint, we can decide who should in the best position to have a specific committee. That's what we do.
Thank you, Prof. Mellows.
That's why I mentioned the CPD committee that we have at present, the consultation between the board and a person who's not a member of the board of engineers actually chairs that particular committee.
Okay, taking one step back again, Amin Bash asked the question on whether a person appointed could be there for more than 9 years. There's a possibility of that happening.
I think if you go to 7, you will see that. Go back to 7, Chris.
He's at 7 now.
Are you on 7?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a person appointed a board holds office for a term of 3 years or until his replacement has been appointed, but is eligible for reappointment by maximum of 2 further consecutive terms. So yes, somebody could be there for 9 years, you could be there for 10. Because let us say you're there for 3 years and you're appointed for 3 years again. And your third appointment for 3 years, the minister, that is 9. But if the minister does not appoint somebody to replace you because you have served your maximum term of 3 terms, of 3 consecutive terms. Remember, there's another article which should override that. In other words, we do not want the board, we said we do not want the board to be in abeyance. So if the minister for a year doesn't appoint somebody to replace you, well, you stay on and you're there for 10 years. But that's not likely.
Thanks, Prof. Imbe. So move on to secretary and officers.
Moderator, I believe this one refers to who we have now, that's the admin assistant and the secretary who has to run the office and the day-to-day affairs of the board, not to the registrar. So may appoint a secretary. This gives us, and that's what we have presently, admin assistants. We also have another secretary in the office so that they carry the function of the board. That is so that the office has somebody in it, so that we're not overwhelmed by the registrar having to do everything, but we do have somebody in the office to assist him in the carrying out of his functions. So he does making this, put it, so the secretary we're talking about here is not the registrar, but an office admin or also secretary who works in the office. This is what this refers to.
Okay, thank you. Move on to remuneration.
Can I, Professor Amber, handle this one? So right now, the board doesn't get any remuneration.
Yeah, there are some boards, most boards, people get paid to be members of the board. I am on 5 boards, I get paid for only 2. I get a stipend for being chairman of the board of UDT, a stipend for being chairman of the board of MIC. Acting chairman, and soon I suspect will be chairman of the board of the Prince Elizabeth Home, which requires a lot of work, but we are not paid. And
Not paid.
we're not paid, no. Traditionally, that board is not paid. That board was set up since 1953. So it's a long time ago, and volunteers or things. So we are not paid, and that's that. I'm chairman of Birdsong, and Birdsong as for entities under it. I'm not paid. You don't expect to be paid as chairman of our steel band. Our steel band is something you normally give money to rather than ask for money. And I'm also on another board, football, and it's again voluntary. So some boards are paid. It is up to Professor Mellows and these guys to lobby as to whether they want to be paid some little stipend.
Right now, we rely on persons, even those who are appointed legal professional from outside, they're not paid at all to do anything. So it's what I call service to the engineering profession. Even the registrar is not really paid any full stipend per se. But this gives provision if a board in the future thinks that there should be some kind of remuneration, it is there in the act, so they can do it, okay? But right now, there's no, all we get is, I suppose, around Christmas time, they may give you a little basket and tell you take that for work during the year, but they're not paid at all. And I suppose this, in this modern age, persons usually ask what's in it for me. And this whole idea of working for service, maybe going out of style, but nevertheless, this has been put in just in case the board feels that they should give remuneration or honorarium. It doesn't necessarily have to give regular salary as such, an honorarium or stipend. That is allowed. Okay. I think that's what that is for. It doesn't
And-
apply to the present board.
Okay, and indemnity?
That doesn't apply to the board as well. So we're out on a limb. Anything happens, your own personal liabilities right now. And we're trying to get over that, making sure that this is in the new act. It's not in the old act, and therefore you can be sued personally, even though you're given a service. Remember that? That's before that. You can still run into trouble with what's going on here. So that is why, as a side issue, I can say that when the Board of Engineering is asked to suggest members to serve on different committees outside that may involve litigation, what the board usually does is look at the list of registered engineers who are in a critical field and tell the people then that they must then choose from among the registered engineers. They make the choice, and it is up to them then, if anything goes, it is their choice. That's what we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to 19.2.
That goes without saying, I believe, because what has happened is that some people apply in the name of somebody else, and even you use this. If you come across that before, it's a police matter, report to the police if anything such thing happens. So you need to know something that the person who they say they are. You're trying to avoid fraudulent persons applying, and that's one way of having that done. And that's why that came up.
Moving on to 22.
Prof, Mary, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, some people have degrees that are not strictly speaking engineering degrees. So that some people have mixed degrees. There are a lot of mixed degrees. We don't have many of them in UWI. We have a few of them. For instance, I remember years ago, the Department of Chemistry had a degree in chemistry and management or something like that, because they wanted to broaden the employability of their graduates. In England, you get a lot of degrees. I know that there are degrees in engineering and management. Now, most engineering degrees, again, going back to the UK spec, must have a certain amount of management in it. They mandate that. I know some civil engineering degrees, some accreditation bodies say you should even have a course in project management, because civil engineering very much involves project management more than any other discipline. So what it is that, let us say somebody has a degree. Let us say we have met people, for example, who have City and Guilds at a pretty high level. What is called the City and Guilds has the first year certificate. I'm talking about the technical degree, the technical qualification. First year certificate, second year technician diploma, third year advanced diploma, and the fourth year you get a bachelor's degree. Now, let us say somebody has got the, and we have had those cases, somebody has got the advanced technician diploma, but they then do a degree in project management. Right? It's not really engineering as such. They have one or two related subjects in engineering. Or somebody does a degree in construction management. They would have done some construction courses. We may ask them to do some engineering courses if they want to be registered as a civil engineer.
The chair, also, in terms of the assessment, they require then some kind of oral written examination as well. So the board will, yes, yes. I think a lot of persons have been asking, why don't we have written examinations? But again, the board, it doesn't really have the capacity to run less written examination on a continuing basis. But this is still being looked at. But right now we have provision to have oral examination done by competent engineers of the persons who require to have an oral examination. Sometimes you're not too sure, but the person has fully satisfied requirements and training in what they've done. So we like to give them not necessarily an examination that you get at university, but an examination to how they practice and how they can operate as independent persons, as an engineers. They may be given oral examinations, and that has been done and is being done as well.
That's
Oh, all right, now, go ahead. Sorry.
CARICOM, Prof?
Huh?
The CARICOM, you want to start with that a bit?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that in my opening remarks, that somebody who is registered in a CARICOM country, a country which has similar criteria for registration, would be eligible for registration in Trinidad and Tobago. As I said before, I have had comments myself, my people who because some people sent comments to me already when this ad came out, that it shouldn't just be CARICOM. In other words, we should remove the word CARICOM. So how it should, according to them, how it should read is a person who is registered in another territory where the academic. So if you remove the word CARICOM, it caters for the question I was asked previously, is to why don't we sort of equate registered engineer to ING and so on. I would imagine that part of that question was whether we should recognize these people, CNG and ING and so on. So that is something that I think we need to take into consideration. So it's something that I will address to the board itself. So but right now it says CARICOM territory. And the reason it says territory is that some CARICOM territories are not countries. Montserrat is not a country. The Cayman Islands are not a country. Anguilla, they decided to stay with Britain as, at first it was an associated state. They have some other status now. They're not independent.
Just remember, persons coming from the states as a PNs, etc., they're also considered to have been qualified because they look at their qualifications as well, and we consider them that they can be registered. That's also part of the act as well. That's what we look at as well. We did say that early on. I bet those who are bet qualified. Probably at this point, I should mention that those who the SPE, Society of Professional Engineers, we also take registration for those persons as well. And the basic qualifications which we look at with that the SP recognizes, because sometimes they don't have basic training they may come from natural science as well, but then they're trained for a couple of years as engineers, MSc level, and they recognize that. So we more or less agreement with them, not necessarily in writing, but we also accept persons whose academic qualifications are accepted by the Society of Professional Engineers, who's also recognized by the Americans as well. So therefore, just in case somebody asks that question, I think that I should give a short explanation on that they're not left out.
Thanks. Amin Bach has a comment or recommendation that 21(1) should only exist if there is the avenue for reciprocity. So maybe reciprocity should be included in section 21.
Well, there have been discussions. The CCU, I was Secretary General of the CCU for 10 years, 96, I think, to 2006. The CCU has had discussions on the question of reciprocity. Reciprocity, no, there was also a delegation from CARIFORUM. CARIFORUM is CARICOM plus the Dominican Republic. There was a delegation from CARIFORUM that went to Europe and Britain. We met with the Engineering Council, the sort of registrar, whatever he was, of the Engineering Council in Britain. We met We met in Brussels. We met the European Organization of Engineering Associations and so on. And we specifically went to France as France and Germany as the two biggest ones in the European Union, and particularly in the field of engineering. And there were discussions about reciprocity under the regional something. I can't remember. But it was an organization that was looking at different agreements with Europe. It was supposed to be followed up by that institution. I'm trying to remember. It was headed by Alistair McIntyre at the time. It was a powerful regional organization. They expected the engineering bodies to follow up. Now, the CCO, I imagine, I had long ceased to be a member of CCO at the time.
I could comment on that, Prof.
Yeah, the CCO was supposed to follow up, but I don't know what was happening.
Right, they're actually still following up with the different territories. I believe Dr. Miraj would have an idea of that because we've had some meetings. And that is one of the goals, to look at reciprocity as far as the engineers are concerned in the Caribbean region. And that's why I suppose CARICOM was the major emphasis at the time. That's why that was putting there. But it also applies to any country, I would imagine, that would apply to. But this reciprocity is still being discussed now because you have a new board for a new structure as far as CCO is concerned. You have not only then the president or chairperson, you have a secretary, you also have a treasurer as such. So it's not a one-person thing anymore, and therefore they have been mandated to look at the reciprocity, etc., and also see how well they can work with other engineering organizations throughout the Caribbean region. So that is an ongoing work. I'm not supposed to speak on their behalf, but that is what is happening.
Well, I suppose in reciprocity has to start somewhere. So if we in Trinidad and Tobago are generous and we say, well, we will start the ball rolling by giving people that bly, as we say in Trinidad, we hope that they reciprocate and give our people a bly too.
Right.
I'll move on.
This section is similar to what we said above. The eligible oral examinations, etc. And this also we may conduct. That's what Professor Mbere spoke for just now, in terms of people having qualifications that are close or nearby. We look at that as well. I think that's what Professor Mbere addressed not so very long ago. And this emphasizes that. Because sometimes you really need to do special investigations, because sometimes the certificates presented, especially in this modern age, where you can just photocopy and do all kinds of things with photographs and cut and what have you. We really sometimes have to, when you're not sure about certain things, to conduct investigations. And sometimes you do put it in the hands of the police, and they will continue the investigations for us.
Thanks. This section on stamps had a lot of questions. So perhaps I'll jump into some of the questions. Amin commented that stamps should only be used within the discipline approved by POET, and that they should be returned when a person is deregistered for whatever reason.
Yes, that is a practice, of course. I think Engineer Batch was familiar with the board, how the board operates, and if that happens, you have to return your stamp. And if you're no longer practicing, you can also apply then to be allowed to keep your stamp based on certain conditions. But that stamp is the property of the board, and they provide the board so you can use it as a registered engineer. and it contains the registration number per se. But you're no longer, you're deregistered, as you just said, you're obligated to return the stamp. Or if you reach the age where you feel that you are no longer practicing, but you need this to maintain the registration, you may be allowed to do that as well. But of course, you pay a reduced fee. In some cases, you just can't pay the fee, then we allow you then to remain a resident engineer, not necessarily practicing, and therefore you wouldn't need the stamp per se.
I think I'll have to agree with Engineer Bash that we have to be a little more specific.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
Ryan Collins also agrees that there are no regulations covering the use of the engineer's stamp. He stated that jurisdictions like Jamaica and Canada make this explicit.
I think if they could help us by sending their comments, to specific comments and pointing out those other jurisdictions, it would help. But one never wants to reinvent the wheel, and it's always, you know, there's best practice by many people. So if they could send their specific comments on what they'd like to see to the board's website, the board's email, sorry, referring of course to amendments to the engineering profession. That would be useful.
And I think on the chat you have it, email to info@web.org, sorry.
Yes. Moving on to section 27.1. Okay, moving on.
You haven't changed any of that. All this still in, that's the original app. All this is still in the original app. We haven't changed that.
As I'm scrolling down, there was a question on CPDs, continuing professional development, and if it should be mandatory.
Well, that is one of the things we left open, the kind of comments that we should have on the current thinking by the board is we'd like to have it. Now, I'm not a member of the board, but I'm on the accreditation committee for the longest while. So I consider myself one of the agents of the board. Not by myself, of course, I'm on a committee with other people, which is chaired by Professor Mellows, who is a member of the board, of course. As we said, those two mandatory committees must be chaired by a board member, the accreditation committee and the assessment committee. All right. I think the issue of mandatory thing is the current thinking, but we would really like to have more opinions from stakeholders and so on it before we, but it is something that we probably will have to include as an amendment. And I dare say, when you look at the
prohibitions, Prof. It's
when you
implied
look at, yeah, but when you look at the types of activities that are allowed under to make up your PDUs, professional development units, it's wide. So the attendance at seminars, for instance, webinars now that we have the word webinar, which is an online seminar kind of thing. If you are teaching a short course, for example, and things like that, it's wide. So it doesn't really restrict you to say you have to go and do a special course here and a special course there and so on and so on. It's pretty wide, so it shouldn't be, and it is over a period. They don't say that is every year you have to say, well, every year I have to do it. It's over a period. Because engineering, as we know, some people say that an engineer is obsolete after 7 years. Well, if you don't do if you don't keep up with the practice, I don't know if 7 years is the right thing, but as I say, So yes, CPD is something that is being considered, and we'd like to have more views on it, especially from specific stakeholders that we have asked to comment.
And moderator, I believe it's implied in the first statement under prohibition. No person who is not a resident there under the act shall do these things. We're not saying mandatory, but that implies that it is mandatory.
Amin Bash made a comment here that the word shall be used to reinforce the registration in this section 27.1.
What Professor Mbair just said, the board has to consider all these statements which they can send on to the board, and we will then come up and apply these different things that you've said that we think we should have and what we more or less agree to this afternoon. So they'll be taken into account then, and when we have this out, we have it on the website so people can comment on it when we do have it. But we didn't change, we tried to make a minimum amount of amendments that we could to the board. Right? And this one under being added under resident engineer. And we think this is important because we get sometimes cases coming to us where persons consider this has happened. It says they shall not review the work of another resident engineer for the same employer or client, except with the knowledge of such engineer, unless such engineer's engagement on the work has been terminated. We had complaints along this line already. We felt that we should clarify that. That's why this section is there. Professor Mbair, what do you think about that one?
No, I agree. I agree. If you're going to review my work, you should let me know, because I may want to make some explanations before.
So that's what that is about.
Yeah.
Moderator, I suppose you. All right. So,
And,
as I said, we try to make minimum change to the act. We don't want any problems as far as getting the act passed through. And at the same time, we try to improve the operation of the board and the significance of registration as far as the country is concerned. Moderator?
Yeah, so some general questions. Varun Katwaru asks, shouldn't the behavior of the registered engineer expected be towards all engineers as opposed to just registered engineers? Assuming this refers to behavior in general in public. So perhaps I could answer for to indicate that with these amendments, we need to become registered engineers. So all engineers who have the 4 years of experience need to become registered. These changes to the act indicating such. You can correct me if I'm wrong, presenters.
No, I agree. That is a satisfactory answer. If it is that we are saying all people who are practicing engineering must be registered, therefore we're talking about registered engineers. I mean, once that is agreed, the other thing follows. If it's not agreed, well, then we'll have to change that to engineers. If that question of mandatory registration is not agreed, well, then we'll have to change the wording to all engineers. Because it means that not engineers, people can operate as engineers without being registered.
Okay. Thanks, Prof. Lorraine Williams has a question. What is the relationship between registration and competency in any profession?
You know, registration is like accreditation. When somebody gives you accreditation, an institution gives you accreditation, what they're really saying is that you have all the resources that are required to produce a certain product. And this is what registration is saying. When you to be registered, you have to satisfy the educational and the experience requirements. What it is really saying is that this person has the resources to operate in a particular way. If the person does not operate in a particular way, through negligence, through malfeasance, whatever reason it is for an incompetent behavior, that person is subject to disciplinary procedures by the board as a registered engineer. If you're not a registered engineer, well, at the moment, the board cannot discipline somebody who's not registered. Another reason why we want everybody to be registered, who are practicing at the level of it.
We have no control over them if they're not registered, because the code of ethics would not apply to them. And of course, because you're trained and have the competencies, it doesn't mean that you're going to apply your competencies. What we're saying that you're trained, you have a satisfactory degree, you're being assessed as to your performances, and therefore you are registered to operate as an engineer in Trinidad and Tobago. It doesn't say we're complimenting on how good you are, how you're not, if you're good or bad, we're not commenting on that. Your performance will show this, and then we can discipline you if you have reached the ethics as far as we are concerned. If not, we can't do anything at the present moment. But note that you have malperformed. That's all we can note.
Okay, thanks, presenters. So as we are nearing the close of this session, I would like to ask of the presenters, what will be the way forward before I provide my closing comments?
Well, the way forward I see is to get as many comments as possible from this particular meeting. But we also, and remember, people have up to the 7th of May to send their comments in, all of which will be taken very seriously. We also, as I said, invite comments from very specific stakeholders. And those comments also would form part of the review of what will finally come out as the proposed revised act. So people who have attended here, who have not, tell everybody who you know who is interested that they have up until the 7th of May to send in their comments. The email of the Board of Engineering. And that will be mentioned and it will be put up, I guess, on the screen or something in moderator. And to thank those who have attended and to remind them that you can go at any time. We will also put on recorded and on YouTube. We thank, of course, I don't want to take away the vote of thanks from Maraj, Engineer Maraj, but we thank UGT for facilitating this whole meeting this afternoon. We didn't have to pay UGT, by the way. We did it gratis. And as I said, feel free to comment, go on the YouTube, let people see the YouTube. It will be also broadcast by TTT on one of their special platforms. We are paid for that. Trinidad and Tobago Television, TTT Online. So that's it. Thanks, as I say, for viewing. Thanks for the questions.
I would like to express my word of thanks to UTT and also to Ganfin Mohammed for the work that he has done in helping organize this webinar, and for Professor Mdir, who is the driving force behind this, and for the assistance then of Chris Maraj, who's also very keen in ensuring that the engineering fraternity is recognized and that they have a place as far as we're concerned, like the other professions have. I'd like to thank all those who listened this evening and took part in the discussion on behalf of WEC. And of course, these suggestions coming to WEC, we have to get together again, of course, to ensure then that we incorporate these in the suggestions for change before we go on to give it to the minister, who has the final say as such. But not the final say, but he has the opportunity to pass it on then to the cabinet for their decision, and also for the legal people, of course, to look at it. I believe we sent this document, I believe, to some legal people who may give us some feedback as far as that is concerned. I know I initiated that through someone. We sent also off some lawyers so they can look at it to let us know some of the implications of this document. Back to you, Mr. Moderator.
I thank the presenters for giving up their time today. And I also want to thank the viewers, our live viewers. We had a very good number from what I'm seeing here. I thank you all sincerely for your attendance and very, very valuable contributions. As my dear colleague, Dr. Ray Fulong, often shares with me, the proposed changes to the Engineering Profession Act that include the mandatory registration of engineers are an extra mechanism in which the public is protected. Specifically, the public is protected by knowing that there's an entity which is responsible for ensuring the practicing and competent engineer meets the minimum educational requirements, is engaged in continuous professional development, and is ethically responsible. Thank you all so much, and take care.